Anticipation has interesting energy because when you say anticipation, you're thinking about something that hadn't happened yet and might not happen at all, but it's very positive. That's when you use the word anticipation. And anxiety is the same energy, but it's things that hadn't happened yet, might not happen, but they're negative. And it's really the framing of that, of your experience in that moment. Like, are you thinking that you're going to be in an experience where when you're in that moment, you're going to like have fun, be happy, feel connection, or you're going to feel like you're at risk, or in danger. And it's very much of a choice. Like, you can look at something at the same situation and be anxious and be, worried or concerned for it to happen, or anticipate. And I very much prefer the anticipation. Like, I think that's generally a choice we have in life, right? Like, negative and positive things happen all the time, and the only difference is your focus. Because in any facet of any situation, there's a positive and a negative. And so I really prefer to put myself in the mindset of anticipation. It's very easy to go into anxiety. It's very easy to think about the problems that might happen, but all the wrong things that could occur on the trip, the things you're going to forget, the weather, the long lines. But I've done it so many times that I know a lot of beautiful things happen as well. Like, so something I didn't expect when we traveled to Japan, which we've been wanting to go for a long while, and we traveled very light. So we came, and about every 3 nights, we put the kids to sleep, and I took a laundry bag and walked down to a coin laundromat and put the laundry in and just walked the streets for an hour, right? Walked the streets of Osaka, of Kyoto, of Tokyo. And it was amazing. Just me by myself. It's the safest freaking place on earth. It's incredible. Like, your nervous system is not wired like when you're there. And I didn't know that was going to happen. And I didn't know that would have been one of my most like favorite experiences, like doing laundry at night in Japan while walking the streets. Right? 100%. And I could have, but I could have chosen the other one. I was like, oh, how am I going to do laundry? What are we going to do with the clothes? What's going to happen? I'm like, I don't know. We'll figure it out, because I trust my figure out ability. And then something beautiful happened, a beautiful habit, a beautiful memory.
Lior, have you always been this attuned to, because it seems like I have this imagery in my head when I was listening to you talk, that there's like this ridge line, right? As we go from peak to peak, right? Memory to memory, experience to experience. And like on one side is anticipation and the other side is anxiety. Have you always been one to like fall to the anticipation side? I mean, is that something that like was you're brought up with, or is this a learned behavior, or you're just genetically wired that way?
I'm definitely positive. And generally, I'm an optimist. To try to kind of nail down how early that was, I don't think I was an optimist as a very young kid. I wouldn't say I was a pessimist. I was definitely very serious, though, in the sense that I took things very seriously, like very like with intent, right? As opposed to like very lightweight. So I think when I was very young, like, 6, 8, 10, stuff like that, I was very serious, and I had a hard time like finding joy. Not that I was depressed, right? But kind of looking at the situation and finding joy. And as I grew older, I definitely started just kind of noticing a lot of tiny moments, kind of driving the car and looking outside at the flowers. And I'm like, oh, that's so pretty. Like stuff like that, these kind of micro appreciations. And I think the more I did that, the more I just defaulted into noticing small things or casual things, but appreciating the fact that, oh, I get an opportunity to experience this right now. And so, and I'm definitely an optimist. Like even in our world and technology, especially now with AI, every time automation or computers come in, there's a lot of doomsday, and a lot of pessimism, and I'm definitely on the optimist camp of it. So yeah, I think I was never like the reverse. Like I was never like a pessimist, but it took me a while to learn how to be like default into happy, for sure.
Yeah. I love your imagery. I think we all can assimilate with this idea that as kids, sitting in the back seat, either both parents or a parent or like a relative is driving, and it's usually on a long road trip, um, and we're looking out the window, and we notice these like little moments, and it's so interesting that more and more entrepreneurs I talk to, it seems like this is a common thing. Like they just notice the thing that might just be in, like we talk about the days and time just blur together. And it's like, oh, hey, like that was a moment. And what's interesting to me is that it seems like you have taken I think the change from, hey, I'm an adult and I'm supposed to be living this very structured life and that this is how it's always supposed to be, and try to bring your life back to what it was like as a kid. Instead of driving in a car going from neighborhood to neighborhood, your home is no longer just Atlanta. Your home is actually the world. And these little microcosms that you're getting experience I mean, that has to bring you back to this feeling of uh, a kid, except with freedom.
Yeah, and I think as a kid, growing up in Israel, um, it's a very tense society, right? It's very militaristic. It's an active, military active war zone. And that seeps into the attitude, into the mindset of everyone. And certainly me, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and that's when a lot of the suicide bombings and all these like horrific things, started happening. Like they became a thing, in the world, and Israel was the hotspot. And also like being like, until I moved to the States, so this was 14 years ago, I didn't like, if you called Lior, I wouldn't even turn my head, because my name by and large was my last name, was Weinstein. It's a military culture. We hardly use first names. And certainly for me, like the fourth kid, the youngest kid, then I was like in this kind of railroad tracks of my siblings. And also in our little town, that we grew up, like it's everybody knows the families, right? So certainly that's the personality that I grew up with, like very more stoic, definitely taking things more seriously. So I think now as an adult, I'm actually getting a kid-like experience that I didn't have as a kid. Because growing up as a kid, I didn't have that default, like super happy. By the way, very, very safe household, very, like nothing, nothing from the parents. It's really like big culture, country level, energy that I felt. Like I'm very empathetic, so I felt it, and I'm glad I have it. I'm glad I have that ability to distance myself and be objective about things, and being able to process very difficult things if I need to. But now as an adult, I'm actually like unlocking a lot of things that people generally have in their childhood, and I think it's actually more fun because now I am an adult and I have a credit card, and like things that kids don't have. So I get to do really cool things with that joy.
I think that, let me preface this with, I think context and sometimes life forces context on you. And I mean, it's crazy to me to think about that, things that we just go, oh, suicide bombing. Like that's just something that we just go, oh yeah. But you actually were there. It's like before Google, and then there's after Google. Like it's just like, okay, how do we ever like live without a search engine? It's like you were there for this like new mode of communication. Do you think that has allowed you a greater bandwidth of understanding other people's context, because yours got so warped at like when I say warped, not in like however, not in a bad way, but it got like definitely different than my upbringing at like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Israelis mature much faster. And that's why and a lot of it is kind of the childhood in Israel and the culture. And then we go to the army at 18. That helps. And you see it. You see Israelis at, at 20, 21 being platoon commanders, right? Or like doing very complicated operations. And then they leave the army and they meet their American peers at 21, 22. And it's like the 22-year-old American feel like a 16-year-old Israeli from a maturity level and behavior level. And that's not to bash anything. My kids are fully American, and that's probably what's going to happen. But it's going through that adversity, one on just a pure cultural level, but then like specific experiences that just put everything in context. Like when something bad happens, sometimes bad things happen in business, like terrible, annoying, and I'm like, am I getting shot? No. I'm like, all good. Let's continue. Like I have such a better benchmark to adversity. And I think a lot of military vets in the US have the same thing, right? Like, are we getting shot? No. Is somebody dying? No. Okay. We'll deal with it. Whatever that is. And just Israelis get it at a younger age. Because it seeps through the grandparents, the parents. Certainly for me, I'm the grandkid of Holocaust survivors, and my parents are kids of Holocaust survivors. So even particularly this, like I don't know I was going to be in 30 years, right? Because our kids now are great grandkids of that generation, so their experience of it is very different, and their kids are going to be very different, and so on. But yeah, like going through some of those moments just put everything into perspective and also allow you to empathize way more. I would say, there's a few stand-up comedians in Israel also kind of joke about this, like, cultural PTSD that we have and that we don't realize until we talk to someone that's out of the culture, right? And so with that, we can also be insensitive. Right, like somebody's going through something, and we, by default, I'm not now because I'm, trained out of it. But by default, we could be dismissive, right? Like your experience could be very painful, and it might be because whatever, your mom hurt you, your girlfriend left you, some life thing that's fairly common. But for a lot of, like in our culture, we're like, oh yeah, that's cute. Like that would be the default, like a perspective on it, which is not the right perspective, right? It's a defense mechanism, right? This is how we kind of psychologically, build up our walls to protect ourselves from bad things to happen. So it does add the ability to both distance and to super empathize with people. And I think the learned behavior that I've had over the years is exactly that. Everybody has their challenges, and the magnitude of those challenges and the depth of those challenges are completely subjective. And yes, it's true, not everything somebody's getting shot at and but it feels just as bad.
Well, what's interesting to me is I'm looking at your layers, right? Your grandparents were like Holocaust survivors, right? So they went through something. Like then your parents went through like what I think it was the Zionist wars, right? Like afterwards, my history is a little, but like they had conflict there, right? As Israel is being fully established, and then with you in terms of suicide bombers, I'm really curious. Did your parents have the same sort of ability to walk that ridge to be able to go, you know what? I could be in like anxiousness, but I'm going to choose anticipation. And then further on, like your grandparents, I mean, you had like a front row seat to learning from, I mean, quite frankly, one of the most horrific human or lack thereof humanness, incidences.
Yeah. So the answer across the board is yes, but not through, like, we never spoke about it. So yes, by osmosis, but never through like education or conversation. Certainly, I mean, my grandparents were incredible. and so for on my mother's side, both of them suffered through like my grandfather was interviewed. He Steven Spielberg did this huge documentation effort. He interviewed thousands of survivors, so he was one of them. So I have like 3 hours of him talking to his experiences. My grandmother, though, was in Auschwitz, and she was under Dr. Mengele, which is very infamous for the experiments he ran, and she never spoke about it. Like, she completely closed off. And my mother, who was her firstborn, she had a lot of miscarriages before she had my mother, and then they had another daughter, so my aunt. But their life energy, certainly from all of my years with them, but also before, because I met a lot of people later that knew them, very early on, was so positive, so positive. Like, they went through horrific things. Like, my grandfather, the only people that survived, he had a huge family. So he survived, his father survived, and his oldest sister survived, which he died just not too long ago at like 106. But everybody else, they had a lot of siblings, and grandparents and uncles and cousins. Everybody else perished. And same thing with my grandmother. My grandmother, she's the only one that survived, and then her cousin, and that's it. So horrific things, plus seeing horrific things, because this was a very brutal war. And as a kid, you don't have an appreciation for this, right? But it's very common when you're in high school in Israel, you go to like a trip to Europe, to Poland, and kind of go through this tour, look at the camps, and then that's the first time it hits you. You're there in Auschwitz and freezing cold, absolutely freezing, and you're with everything, right? Coats, it's a school trip, right? So you're taken care of, and you're freezing, and then you realized, these people were there naked while getting hosed down by water. And of course, all the, other stuff we don't need to mention. And to think that they went through that, and to know them, like, if you ever met them, you'd be like, these are the happiest people I met. And it's just like, wow, like, what resilience, what energy. Like, they could have easily, like, turned into, they had all the reason in the world, right? To use blame and to kind of victimize and like everything, any reason you can imagine. And they didn't. And they chose to have kids and go through the challenges of having kids. Chose to move to Israel, which, was, to your point, not easy in the formative years. And they did it. And then the love they had for us as grandkids, I mean, that they always said that that's their biggest, success and love, like having us, having the kids and having us. And they were incredible grandparents, super present. So I think a lot of my certainly attitude and happiness stems from that relationship. Again, by osmosis, not because we sat down and they told me, Lior, you should be happy in life. They never said that. So it's really by example. Now as an adult, I can analyze it. I can kind of look at it and like look at them as like individuals, not just as my grandparents. And to think that they, left, like they experienced this in their like teens and early 20s, right? And I'm like, man, my son is about to be a teen, So yeah, definitely that. And then the parents, they had their own PTSD, being the second generation in Israel of that generation. But also content, happy, very positive. Always, both my parents are entrepreneurs. So they had to be positive. Because you, as an entrepreneur, being a negative entrepreneur is weird, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine being a negative entrepreneur. Yeah, it's a funny thought.
That is a really funny thought. How did you experience your parents, them coming to grips with that they were really the first generation of this surviving generation?
I think they not just being that second generation, but also to your point, being in a new country, meaning like forming country and forming everything. I think that generation in general in Israel is super operational. It like super like, let's get it done, right? Let's build the houses, build the business, let's put in the work, let's, take care of the kids. And I think that generation really didn't have a lot of like self-love, self-care. I think that entire thing skipped that generation. And a lot of them now, when they're, 60s, 70s, 80s, um, are trying, some of them are trying not to get back to that. So that generation is like super heads down. And then millennials came, our generation, which is over indexing probably on the other side, right? Like maybe a little bit too much self care and self love. But yeah, but still positive, like very, especially in the 60s and 70s and as well, very like a lot of camaraderie, a lot of common celebrations, common goals. Israel doesn't have that now, which is kind of, very different fabric, and it's noted, like you feel it.
Really? Yeah. What I find fascinating is that your grandparents, your parents, and to a really large extent you as well, went through something that created, like I call like Newton's law. Like, and I went through that with like Benny, and I had the realization, and like in this, like really, it just hit me like in just like a lightning bolt, that the depth of my sorrow was indicative of an equal and opposite reaction, and that I had a choice between which side was I going to want to fall in love with. And I'm curious, as we think about like your kids, right? They're growing up very much in an Americanized, and I'm listening to like your grandparents and then your parents and then you, and there's some of the things that get people so riled up today. Why is it that is like, I mean, do you just sort of look at some of like the headlines and not that laugh, but just sort of go like, I'm not getting shot today. Next.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's very. I mean, the first time I was phased in years, was when October 7th happened. We were in coach in Chicago. It's a few days after. I think it was the second week of October or something. And I was rattled for months, and I never felt that way. Never. Even when I was in active duty, even when I was up, I've never felt that way. And I'm still processing that. I think everybody in Israel is still processing that. That one is going to take a few years to metabolize out, if at all. But other than, and I think because it like hit a vein, like it hit something that actually for the first time made me feel like I'm not sure I know what to do with it, like deal with it, or like it's the first time my mind went into like danger mode, which most people get into danger mode because of whatever, they see like a plane issue on the news and they're afraid of going on the plane, a week later. But other than that, when I see challenges of any kind, I'm like, yeah, not getting shot today. All good. Let's figure it out. Like life is, you can just negotiate through it. I mean, there's one of my favorite YouTube channels for years. I was a very early subscriber. It's a channel called Soft White Underbelly. And it's this guy, award-winning photographer and videographer. And he basically just installed himself at Skid Row in Los Angeles. and he interviews, I think he phrases it as like broken people. And he uploaded thousands of videos, and he has many, many more thousands that he never uploaded, because he might shoot 8-10 videos a day, and he uploads, one. And I'm utterly addicted. I've definitely watched many hundreds, of those videos. And you see the life stories, and it's incredible. It's incredible how little relationship somebody has from their upbringing to their adulthood. And you see these stories time and time again, beautiful, beautiful childhood, great parents, great neighborhood, something happens, drugs, prostitution, can't get out of the streets for 25 years. And the opposite. People, like, you hear their life stories, my gosh, I mean, that's why even when I say suicide bombing for you, but I'm like, the stories that I've heard, I mean, talk about women or men. Yep, I started getting, abused when I was 4, and, the first 4 years with my brother, and then, my uncle, and then and then it's like horrific, absolutely horrific. I mean, I can't even like wrap my head around it. And now they're this incredible entrepreneur, successful, making money, 7 kids, leader, beacon of their community. Like, it's just, it's even for me as parent, we think about this all the time. Like, am I scarring my kids? Am I hurting my kids? Am I doing right by my kids? Am I giving them the right education? Am I giving them the right experience? And I'm like, and every time, and I'm so glad I watched all those videos, because I just know that, everybody has their own life, and you can metabolize any event into anything. You can say, I'm going to use this for power and take control and use it for positivity, or I'm going to use the same experience and I'm going to, find a reason to hurt myself or others, and experience life in a very different way. And also the appreciation that life is actually, I mean, on one hand, life is short. We were just talking about, how like months go by, years go by, but life is also fairly long. It's the longest thing I know, right? So like you can reinvent yourself. You can say, this season of life, this is what I'm gonna do. This is how I'm gonna act. And at some point you just realize you are in control. Circumstances might be different, and challenging, but you're still in control. And so maybe it is going to take you a little bit longer than other people, but also for some other things, it's going to take you a little bit shorter, a little bit faster than other people. So, and I love that. I love that variety of life. That's why, like, when I see difficult things, we're just talking about it also a few months ago when one of our friends, brothers passed away. And I was making this comment in the room that, sometimes you're connecting the dots, but sometimes you're collecting the dots. And it's just like, you just need to let that happen. Like, and maybe you're collecting a positive one that's going to connect like 10 years from now or 50 years from now. And maybe you're collecting a very negative and painful one that, where it's, I heard it from this shaman, a few months ago, and he said something beautiful. I've heard this probably 1,000 times, but until he said it, it didn't click as much. And he said, whether it hurts or not, suffering is your choice. Suffering is optional. And it's so good, right? It's so good. Just kind of saying, one, it's okay that it hurts, right? It's also okay that it doesn't hurt. It's okay that it's happy. A lot of people have guilt by being happy and being satisfying. And you don't know if it's a grand scheme. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just like a randomized scheme, right? But maybe it's just the right moment. That like 6 months from now, 6 years from now, it's going to be like, oh my gosh, everything clicks. I love riding those waves. So because I'm used to like having that perspective. So even when something very challenging is happening, it's more than just like having a scaled version of adversity so I can like minimize anything against it. It's more than that. It's also just appreciating that however big this might feel right now, it's going to feel, the feeling is going to be different. The emotion is going to be different after this particular moment.
Yeah, I'm curious when you're watching that soft white underbelly. Is that what it's called? Soft white underbelly. Have not watched that, but pretty compelling offer of listening to stories. I've always been fascinated with stories. I think that going back to caveman times, right? That's like how we passed on not just DNA, but like identity, right? And identity is so incredible. I'm really curious, is that as I'm listening to it, it's like I'm reminded of Robert Frost, that two roads diverge in a wood. And it seems like, I'm curious from your perspective, is that we have this agency, but what do you feel like precedes like that inhale right before that actual decision? To like, hey, you know what? I'm going to accept that this is painful, but I'm not going to prolong suffering. And hey, maybe the other side of this, I'm going to become a victim of this pain, and now I'm going to actually prolong the suffering. Like, what is that immediately precedes that is the difference, right? Because if we all have free will, what differentiates if you're actually going to make what decision?
I think as adults, like a key difference between kids and adults is that ability to pause, right? Like something happens, and before you react, you can choose your reaction, right? And I think a lot of the scars and kind of childhood wounds or adult wounds is really dealing with that, right? It's like, that's what we call it, like a trigger, right? Like something triggers, and it's a pinball machine. Like something is happening, and in that practice of identifying what triggers you, just like recognizing that you actually have an automatic behavior right now that you don't want, right? Because an automatic behavior that you do want, maybe you shouldn't, maybe it's okay to keep it the habit. But just recognizing that you're like, right now you're an automaton. You're actually like just going through a series of actions and behaviors that are not very positive for you or anybody else. And once you identify that, then you go back to the root, saying, okay, what started this? What was the trigger? What was the event? And then what went through my mind that made me react that way? And like, my wife and I do a lot of self-development stuff. And we started, I would say, about maybe 8 years ago, like doing it more like, experiential, right? Like courses and trainings and workshops and stuff like that. And like, even now we're doing this, we read this beautiful book that I highly recommend. It's called Getting the Love You Want. And it's a book about, relationship and you and your wife and your spouse and whatnot. And the book also has a workbook, and it's been around for decades, super famous apparently. And I can see why. It's really good. And it talks about these incredible concepts. And when you go through the workbook, and we're doing it with like 6 other couples, like we're going through the workbook with like a guide, with like an instructor. So we paid her, and we go on Zoom once a week. And yeah, it's amazing. It's like 12 sessions. And it's also amazing to do it with other couples, because then you're like, oh, we're all pretty freaking basic, like same, you see, like you're that personality, you're the other personality. And you even see in the book, like some people are minimizers, when they have something bad happens, they just withdraw. And, and some people are maximizers. When something happens, they explode. And all couples have a minimizer and a maximizer. I'm like, oh, it's just, it's somewhat comforting, and it's also like, I guess I'm not that special, right? But it just says how the human condition and human behavior, like they're actually like professional humans, like meaning that there's something you want to do that somebody figured out how to do well. And some of the examples they give in the book, which is fascinating, is how much your early childhood years affected your adult behavior and adult choices. Now you understand it intellectually, but the book makes you map it, right? Like it gives you these visualization exercises, like, imagine yourself when you're 8 and you're home, kind of meditate, close your eyes, just walk through the home, feel like you're there, and then, find a caregiver, like find your dad, find your mom, and start having the conversations and appreciate them, acknowledge them, say thank you for being there. That doesn't matter if you had a bad experience or not, But then you're like, now tell them all the things that they should have done for you or missed for you. And then you start writing it down. And then they map you out from those needs or frustration to, well, what did you do? When your mom didn't ta-ta-ta. You're like, oh, I withdrew, right? I went to food, or I disappeared. Like everybody has their, behaviors. And then you start mapping it out and you realize that this is exactly how you're acting, with your spouse. And more than that, to like add, just add insult to injury, you unconsciously choose your spouse to be the one that triggers those childhood wounds. So you have the reaction that makes you feel safe.
Interesting.
It's incredible. And I think going through those processes, which is, again, it's like acknowledging behavior, analyzing it down to the trigger, to the kind of chain reaction from the moment it happens to the moment you act, and then working on the change, right? Like, okay, because now that it's kind of like when you learn a new word, suddenly you hear it, everywhere. You notice it in a book, you notice it in a road sign, you notice it in conversation. And it's the same thing. Once you notice a behavior or trigger, you can actually notice it. As soon as you notice it, that means you can grab it. If you can grab it, you can change it. And I think that moment before people make a decision is if they make a decision, right, is that moment when the trigger happens. That's when you catch it, just before the reaction. And people that are really good at it, can control their life, and be happy and be productive. And people that don't are very much victims of this. And that's the art. I mean, we're all trying to be humans. We're all trying to be better,
Did you have any thing that bubbled to the surface that was surprising to you? I mean, and the reason why I'm asking this, because having known you for a while, and what this conversation I think is revealing is that you're very aware, and I think when I say this, measured. I say it like in like the highest esteem of like when you talk, I typically listen, because I know that it's not like it's just not blurting out. Like you've actually allowed it to marinate, put it in the fridge overnight, and now we're taking it out. And so I'm curious, was there anything that surprised you as you were like replaying some of these like death by 1,000 cuts, or however you want to articulate that really bubbled to the surface for you?
From these exercises from the childhood? Oh, a ton. It was fast. It was and is fascinating. We're still going through it. And so this is something also that ties into a general thought I've had in the past few months, which is this, I kind of frame it as like, what does the want? What does the need? And kind of if you look at want or a need as a thing, right, as like its own entity that pops up, and now it carries you somewhere, or it pushes you. And I realized I'm starting to become way more attuned to what I want. And that is not to say I'm a victim. I don't have victim personality at all. Like I'm as a human, I'm not dragged, I'm not influenced. Social pressure means zero to me. I'm not competitive in nature either. But that is not the same thing as being really attuned to what I want. And I think what I've learned through the process is there's something in my childhood through different experiences that depressed me being connected to what I want. And meaning I was like doing things to appease or to fix or to heal or to make better or to make sure, the caregivers in my life and the friends in my life and, the environment. And certainly it got reinforced also later as an adult, being a boss or being a commander or whatever. And so like being in a position where go fix the thing, right? Go lead the thing, go make it happen. And I got good skills. So, and that's what happens when, you're in a position, you have good skills, so you just operate. And what I'm learning about myself now, there's a lot of hidden wants and this want energy, want power that I need to learn how to tap into. Now, my wife on the other side, she's super tapped into it, right? She's tapped into it to the other extent. When she's not getting something she wants, she has like physical, emotive reactions, right, to what it is. Like she's really tuned to it and I'm not. So that was like fascinating to me. Like, and it's not like knock on wood, I didn't have I wasn't abused. I wasn't hurt. Like most of my injuries were certainly like intellectual and mental, stuff like that. And certainly now it's funny. So just like 4 days ago, my brother sent us videos in like Dropbox, like old family videos that, they moved from VHS to, which I've never seen. And I opened those videos and there's videos of me at like 3 and 4 and 6 and 8. And I'm watching those videos with my wife and I'm like, I remember none of this. Zero of this. And I'm looking at it like I'm looking at another person. And it's wild. Wow, I'm like literally looking, I'm like, I can't, it's like a different dimension. It's really like I can't even, like it's not even ringing a bell. It's not familiar in any which way, which is fast. Like, why did I suppress it? Like, what happened there that I suppressed it? And also, it's interesting to see between the 4-year-old videos and the 6-year-old videos, I can see my personality change. And when I look at my 4 and 6-year-old, it's very different. Like, I'll show you some of the videos with me. Like, sound like I'm singing karaoke. And like, as a kid, and I'm like, I can't even, like, I'm just thinking about getting into a microphone, like in that concept, I like, talk about anxiety. I'm like, I minimize, I totally instantly, I go into my shell. And suddenly as a kid, I'm like smiling and singing terribly, by the way, terrible singer. And, and I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. Like, what is that side of the personality? Like, how can I tap into it? Because it looks like fun. Meaning it looks fun. It looks freeing. Intellectually, it makes sense that it's fun, and freeing. So this exploration of kind of going back to the childhood methodically, and with your spouse and with friends that are supportive, supportive and supporting, is great. So it's uncovering a lot of things, and it's making me in my day to day, like I feel like I'm opening up. I feel like I'm starting to get different perspective on things. And even like more happy or more gratitude. I think that's the big thing that's happening to me mostly in the past year. Just a ton of very active gratitude as opposed to passive gratitude. I think I've had passive gratitude for many years.
How would you define both?
So looking at like the flowers, like scenes that I was kind of explaining, like being in a situation and kind of acknowledging this is fun or like this is happy or beautiful, versus like just like stopping. Like if I'm with my wife or with my friends, we were like, hanging out last night with a few friends, a beautiful hotel, on the beach here in Maui. And just like stopping and say, isn't this amazing? Just like physically saying this, like, isn't this amazing? What a life. Like, what a moment. Like, we're looking here under the stars, beautiful night, beautiful trees, beautiful people. At sunset, a whale, like straight beeline under the sun, a whale is splashing in the horizon, and you kind of capture that moment and just recognizing it for what it is, like actually like labeling it. And that's what I mean by active. And I think like our friend Chris Johnson is so good at it. Like he keeps this gratitude journal. And, and I remember like 1 month he had like 1,300 things. And I'm like, holy shit. Like just the ability to kind of pause and look at a micro moment. Like even us, like we're friends, we're talking. I'm like, isn't this amazing? Like we're like sharing an experience, the internet is working, the cameras are working. Like it's like everything is great. So just like being able to stop and pause and label and be grateful. And then you can ride that wave. I think in the passive side, which was great. And certainly if you can have anything, have if you can't have active, have passive, rather than nothing, then you don't share the experience as much. And when you're active, you get to share it with other people, so that it's like a yawn. It's infectious, right? Like when you're grateful, it's other people start instantly being grateful. Instantly. In fact, just us right now, we're talking, anybody that's listening right now, I'm sure right now we yawned, activated them to be grateful in the moment, because the thought passes through your mind, and then you're like, you think the word gratitude and you are in gratitude, like even if it's for a microsecond. And so, and that, you know, shared experience and all these things, like it not just shares it with other people, it also shares it with the future you, because you're reinforcing that behavior. So the next time you get to experience it again, because the last time you did yourself a favor and acted and labeled it, and, you know, and you created a feedback loop in your mind that gave you a positive response. And now you're just getting into like technicalities of habit, right? And that's the big shift for me, just kind of leaning more into active gratitude, even for bad things. In fact, last month, I told you, like, my team is flying in today, going offsite. February was our worst month since we started the business. Worst month. Horrible. Like red. Freaking, like the reddest red. And we had, in March, we had a review. So we're 2 months into the quarter. And we're looking at the pacing for the quarter. And everybody's doing their positive focus. And like, we accomplished this and accomplished that. And I'm like, as the CEO, I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm the CEO. And I'm like, just want to call out, guys, we're going to be about 50% than our bottom quarterly goal. Like, not, we did a good, better, best. We're going to be at 50 than our good, right? I think we actually like saved it somewhat. But then March was our best month ever. You know, talk about a roller coaster, right? And now they're all coming, and it's going to be a great celebration, as it should. And I guess that's the other thing that's happening. That's actually a big thing that happened. So I realized something happened to me in childhood that made me really bad at celebrations. Really bad. I hate it. Even now. You know, even like during my birthday, if people like text me or call me, or like, I'm like, I have an instant like, I don't want it. I don't want any of it. Right? I don't want the attention at all. And I realize it's something that happened there, you know, in those early years. But now as an adult, I very much appreciate the power to celebrate, right? Now, some people in my life are amazing at, like my wife is amazing at celebrating. Jeremy, my chief of staff, is amazing at celebrating, right? And I love that. And I love that they are doing it and not me. but I'm also like I want it. I want to be able to celebrate like they do, like to have that muscle, to have that attitude. So I definitely like to bask in their celebration as an introvert, you know, outside, standing on the thing. But that's another huge theme that's coming, which is, again, it's tied into gratitude, right? It's kind of recognizing something and saying, this is worthwhile. This is a happy moment. We should like record it in the annals of our life. And I'm very happy to do it for my kids. You know, when my kids have a birthday, I'm so happy to do it for my kids. So a few years ago, I learned from another friend of mine, Lee Richter, and she told me about this concept of doing half birthdays. And as soon as she said it, I'm like, I'm in. Basically, like doing a half birthday, you do like half a cake, you know, half the candles. And I have 3 kids. So now we have, you know, between them and my wife, we have 10 celebrations a year.
That's amazing.
Incredible. And like, we doubled on the celebrations.
And this is coming from a guy who literally says, I feel uncomfortable around celebrations.
100%. But for my kids, I love it. I love it. I love celebrating them. I love celebrating with them. Now, when we do a birthday, you know, we invite people, we do the bouncy house, we do the cake. I feel very awkward. I feel very awkward in the moment, right? In the room, right? Like I try to like, okay, I'll just find conversationalists and I'll, you know, like find a few people to just talk to them, right? But for my kids, I feel amazing. I feel amazing that they have people around them. I feel amazing that they have the cake. I feel amazing that they have the celebration and people are like saying their name and singing or whatever it is. So for other people, I love it, right? For me, it's hard for me to receive. I'm just very bad at receiving. And so that's kind of the theme line and the thrill that I'm getting through from this childhood. Something happened there. Something happened there that makes me not good at celebrations and not appreciate them for me. But I recognize that it is great. It's just like it's when it's turned on me, it's a challenge. And yeah, that's the big thing that's getting uncovered. And it's always interesting to see how the lines, again, how the dots connect. Like you don't see it until like, oh yeah, it's that moment. And then you built entire life around that moment, which is silly. And now you need to, and now if you think it's silly, now you need to untangle it. And it doesn't untangle, we have a joke in the space, like 1, 2, 3 healed. I'm healed. Okay, no, it doesn't work like that. You need to work through it. So that's what I'm learning also now, how to identify and how to heal.
Yeah, it seems like that this idea of unpacking, there's like an art to it. And this makes me think of when we recently went this last summer on a heritage trip. My wife's family is from like Italy, and we went to Pompeii. And we're walking down these incredible streets that had like running water. I mean, this is like 2,000 plus years ago. They had running water. They had water fountains that it was just absolutely incredible. And then at the end of the tour, they had disclosed that like there's 23% left still to be excavated. And I had this aha that as human beings, whether maybe in terms of like wherever the belief is, right? But like we're born, and I think most people believe that babies are born innocent. And then somehow we get this Mount Vesuvius of things, of whether it's other people's detritus, it's our own making explosions, right? Our triggers, our own parents or our own family lineage, in that the perfect version of us already exists that we have to unpack. And there's an art to that. And it's interesting as I'm listening to you and as I've been listening to other entrepreneurs, what is below the surface when you unpack it is immense amount of gratitude, love, self-love, grace, mercy, empathy that just brings like a richness. When you think of like, it's this umami that makes flavors and moments. Like you go, why was this so beautiful? When you were talking, you're talking about these gratitude yawns. I love that, by the way, these gratitude yawns. And probably good reason for us to talk about things we're grateful for, because it gives gratitude yawns. But I was reflecting on, I distinctly remember, I think it was between first and second grade, my dad had taken a call in this town in southern Minnesota. And at 4th of July time, I mean, this was a town of like 500 people. Like it was the opposite of like, hey, growing up and thinking about suicide bombers. It was literally like, hey, if you hear the bell and you're on the other side of town, like come home. And it was usually like 8:30 and it was starting to get dark, right? But I distinctly remember this moment where it became like how I remember it in my childlike memory capture, was like this whole town water balloon fight. And I remember just going, even then, like, this is a moment. Like, this is this moment that if I could bottle and have the rest of my life be, like, this is what I would be. And I distinctly remember trying to recreate that the following 4th of July. And it just wasn't able to be there. And so I find it really interesting as you are doing all of this unpacking and that there's a correlation to you becoming a more in mastery of your own art of your unpacking, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something interesting about nostalgia. There's even like Inside Out 2, which is a great movie if you haven't watched it. And they introduced the character nostalgia, right? Because everybody has it. And they do like a lot of comic relief there because nostalgia keeps coming at weird times, right? Like no, go back, because nostalgia is just like reminiscing on something in like a completely irrelevant moment.
Yeah.
And nostalgia is such an interesting force because it's not just a recollection, like the events, right? It's not just the narrative, it's the feeling, like you're there. And I think, and you can't replicate it. Moments don't repeat; they never repeat. It doesn't matter how artificially you try to design it, right? Like let's produce this again, right? Because you're a different person. It's the old adage, a man can't walk twice in the same river because the river is not the same, nor is the man. But nostalgia is still there. And we just like we talked about anticipation and anxiety, right? Nostalgia is a positive force. Like you evoke the word in the context of like great things. You're not nostalgic about when you were beat up, right?
No.
And nobody's nostalgic about trauma, right? That's not the concept. And it's an interesting force. It's something I've been thinking about for years. Like why do we have it? Like, how do we use it? And it does put you in gratitude. I think it's like, it allows you to kind of VR your way back into like whoever you were in that moment and how you were feeling and what you were smelling and seeing and experiencing very vividly, right? Good nostalgia is like, and then you have those triggers like the smells, the sounds, it's like it's a very deep deja vu, right? But instead of something that you think it happened, it happened. And it's such an interesting power. My wife, I joke about this all the time. That's why I keep thinking about it, because like my wife and I could be in a moment, beautiful restaurant, whatever, having dinner or dessert, and she would take a photo, and a minute later she would look at the photo. Like a minute later, she would be nostalgic about it. And then that evening, back home, the same, nostalgic about it. And like, wow, like she's the queen of nostalgia. And it's so interesting what people also choose to be nostalgic about. And because sometimes you can paint history, in a different way, right? And you see this sometimes, I think, with families, like somebody or couples, somebody's describing a moment and the other person is like, what are you talking about? That's not how it happened. Right?
Lior, I'm curious with your siblings, right? You're the youngest of four, right? So you have a very distinct, and I'm curious because my sister and I have a very, like, we have this nostalgia, but we're 3 years apart. We're super close. Yet she will tell me things about like, hey, like she remembers very vividly at like her 5 years old and 6 years old. And I'll just be like, man, I don't remember any of that. And then we'll have a moment. She'll be like, do you remember mom and dad used to like do this? And she remembers it in a very distinct, different filter than mine. And mine is very nostalgic. Like I remember them like kissing in a parking lot going, I want that. And I think she has not a nostalgic moment of, oh my God, stop. And I'm curious with your siblings, when you think about this idea of nostalgia, I'm sure even with you and your wife, like, do you view your childhood differently? I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes, but like, what's the age gap between you?
I was just talking about, so my sister is the oldest, and she's 14 years older than I am, right? So that's the range. So when I was a baby, she was already in high school. And then we have, so she's 71, next brother's 78, next brother's 81, and I'm 85. I'm 4 years younger than my next brother, and 7 years younger than the one after that, and 14 for my sister. And it's actually fascinating. This is an interesting, so I was with my sister just a couple of months ago. We were doing this kind of really first kind of brother-sister trip. was very special. And we were talking about, so when my sister got married, when she was like 23, I think 23, 25. And I remember that day because I was at home and I saw her marriage license. And it had, the name of the father, name of the mother, right? And the name of the father had a different name. And I'm like, oh, there was a mistake in the thing. And then they said, oh, no. You know, my sister had different dad. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Literally, I never knew. So when my mom had another husband and she had my sister, but my mom she got divorced from him and she remarried, with my dad. So my dad had my sister since she was like super young, like 2 years old or 3 years old, something like that, and 2 or 4 years old. And I think 4 years old. And I never knew. They never spoke about it. There was never a concept of a stepsister. To this day, by the way. I mean, it's not, no, there's no, like, I would never say my stepsister. Like, it's not even a term. It's not a label, right? And then I'm like, wild, right? And that's how I discovered it. Like, literally, if I hadn't seen that marriage license, I would have never, known. Now, and then I learned, she my father basically adopted her, as her official dad, and raised in our family and everything. And we haven't really spoken about it. Like, so years later, she met her birth dad, and she had a couple of sisters. So she became friends with them, like a couple of, sisters from him, and she became friends with them. And like, and much, when she was already like 40. And so we were just speaking about this a few months ago. Because I didn't know. It's not something I really thought, like, we never had that kind of talk track, but I didn't know if she knew that she was adopted as a kid, right? And she said, yeah, she did. She always did. She always knew that our dad is not her birth dad. And she also remembers some scenes a little bit, not really, remember her father, but she remembers like that period of like moving out, and she and my mom moved, to her parent, like my grandparents' house, apartment, and so on. And so we were talking about that, and that kind of opened up in general, like her experience as a kid, right? Because again, I didn't know that she knew that she was adopted. And so very different perspective. So it started with her, just literally, that's widely different, right? Thinking like, I think I have my dad and she knows it's not her dad, right? Or rather birth dad, biological dad. And I mean, they have a good relationship, it was never like a thing, but she certainly had an identity around it, around like, not being with a birth dad. And then my brother after, he was the firstborn son, right? Certainly of my dad, technical like first kid, and like all firstborns, very different experience than the last one, right?
Yes.
and I remember this, by the way, like they fought tooth and nail, like my oldest brother and my parents. They have a good relationship now, very loving, but as a teenager, right? That those teenager hormones, and then I was, I already got in. We talked about it at the beginning. I got into these like paved roads. So for them, they were very free to invent themselves and discover themselves. For me, I wasn't. Because I got into these like expectations, again, not active, very passive, right? Again, by osmosis, not like telling Lior, this is how you should kind of operate, right? But very different. So they, I think, had a better sense of self-identity than I did. Because they were the first one. They did have the first ones in the school and the teachers and the thing, right? By the time I came, oh, you're this, her brother or his brother, and so on. So it's a very different introduction to people, right, in my life.
Yeah.
And all very positive, by the way, because they were great. People liked them, so they liked me, which is also nice. So yeah, very different perspectives, very different perspective on childhood in general. And certainly very different perspective on parents. Remember I was mentioning those videos, and then I saw a video of my dad from 1989, and he was a CEO of a company at the time. And this is a party at our house, at our old house, and I'm 4. I'm not in that video, but that's the moment. And he's talking, kind of greeting everybody, or kind of saying, this is what we're gonna do. Desserts are there, or whatever. And I realized, oh, he's 38 in that video.
Wow.
And I'm older than him now. So now being able to have that perspective, and then I realized, when going back to like my memories, which are not a lot from those ages, 4, 5, 6, I realized, oh, the guy that I remember is me. Like, it's the same presence that I have now with my kids.
Wow.
Yeah, very different perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were also, when they grew up, he was younger. Right? He was like late 20s, early 30s. Different person.
Way different. I had my first when I was 26, and then my second when I was 39. And in retrospect, do you feel like at 26, like you got your shit figured out, and then you realize at 39, like
you have nothing figured out?
Yeah, you have nothing figured out. That is really interesting. I was thinking about what you said, like, we have nostalgia, right? And I'm realizing, I think nostalgia is like our attempt to bottle joy, gratitude, love, these things that like were maybe the fabric of our tapestry, right? I'm curious, do you think the opposite side of nostalgia is shame? It's like, that's what then we're bottling. Is shame the bottling of the other antimatter of the nostalgia?
Shame. That's interesting. I mean, shame is, let's think about the utility. So the utility of nostalgia is, I think it's comfort and like soothing, right? So I think it's this, and you're kind of, talk about looking forward and looking backwards, right? So if you have like positive feelings about the past, then you're in nostalgia. I think if you have negative feeling about the past, then I think maybe it's like regret.
I like that.
Because it's not necessarily shame. Like, you're not necessarily in a vulnerable, position when you're thinking about a negative thing that happened in the past. So I think regret might be a better, like, regret, remorse, or labeling something as trauma to begin with, right? Rather, I think shame could come with trauma.
Yeah.
Shame could come with regret. But I think in principle, if you look back at both of those are look back, not look forward. So anticipation, look forward. Anxiety, look forward. Right. So nostalgia, look back. Shame, regret, look back. And it's the negative positive frame. So I think nostalgia is there to soothe us, and regret is there. That's a good question. Like, why do we have regret? Like, what's the lesson to be learned? Right. Because it doesn't feel useful, but it has to have utility if we're going through it. Like, why would it even pass our mind?
It's the lesson that we didn't learn.
It's a lesson that we didn't learn. Yeah, okay, let's play with that for a second. So you have something, you're feeling regret, and let's say you grab the lesson. Yeah, that's a good point. Because if you have the lesson, then you don't regret it. That's what you say, right? You say, I don't regret it. Like, it's a bad thing, but you don't label it as regret.
Yeah.
Which before the lesson, you do label it as regret. Yeah, I like that. I like the lesson unlearned or not learned yet.
Lior, I'm curious, as we've gone down this like future-oriented anticipation, anxiety, this past, nostalgia bottling, regret bottling, and what does that mean? I'm curious, and like in your story, your fabric, right? Of we've looked at things that one side may look at adversity, right? Like you coming to the United States, and I'm guessing a lot of stuff that's happening now, you're like, okay, is it maybe affecting some people? Yeah, and I'm not getting shot. And I'm thinking about, I want to reflect back on something you talked about before, like with your kids growing up here, and that October 7th, it was really the first time that you felt like maybe being brought back into a level of like, okay, but there's something here that needs to get unpacked. I'm curious how you take your art of unpacking and unpack that October 7th, and then how do you actually give these lessons that maybe I don't want to like speak for you, but that the external environment created for you as a child growing up that helped give you context, that stretched your fabric enough. Like, so I'm curious, I mean, as you're unpacking this October 7th, is that giving you the basis for you to maybe start to give context and that stretching for your kids? Because it is an external thing that has happened that that allows them to go, like when you went to Poland, like, I'm curious, would you mind sharing a little bit about how you're thinking about unpacking that, and how do you think about this transference to this next generation?
So I chose to not share it with them yet.
Interesting.
With my kids. And it's not an easy choice, and I don't know if it's the right one. And, you know, some of my mind's on these things that I don't know how I'm going to screw up my kids. That's between them and their therapist. Like, I know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I haven't chosen, and I certainly will, but I chose not to do it yet because I do think that there's benefit in learning about things later in life.
Yeah.
To not put up the anxiety, automatic behaviors up too early. And I see it. So we have, you know, dear friends of ours are visiting us now. And the kids, so their firstborn is exactly 2 days younger than my firstborn. 48 hours apart. And this is my best friend from the military. And he walked in and he looks at the house and, you know, beautiful and all the things. And he's asking, where's the safe room? Because all hotels and houses in Israel have a safe room. So this is like a concrete room. Yeah. So this was started in the 90s during Desert Storm when Hussein launched missiles, like Scad missiles. So they had safe rooms built out of concrete, out of cement. And so every building in Israel has it. Every hotel has it. There's in public spaces as well, right? Out of threat of, you know, missile attacks. And so he comes in and he asks, where's the safe room? And then his, you know, dad, my friend, tells him, oh, there isn't one here. He's like, oh, what are we going to do? And then he needed to kind of convince him, don't worry, here it's fine. You know, there's not going to be alarms. There's not going to be. And then on the same example, my brother, who still lives in Israel, one of them, he has a 6-year-old, same kid as my, same age as my second born. And he also visited us a few months ago. And he had a similar question when he got into my mom's house in the US. Where's the safe room? No safe room. He's like, oh, what are we going to do? But he heard something like fireworks, right? And he tied it into, oh, is there like, do we need to go somewhere? Right? Do we need to go to like a safe space? Because that's the link, right? So there's this kind of countrywide like fabric PTSD, right? Now that's his experience. Now my experience as a kid during Desert Storm, I was same age, you know, 5, 6. And we were like gas masks in Israel and went into a safe room. And I remember everybody in my age remember this, like the smell of the rubber of the gas mask, because we had to put it on and we had to measure it. We had to measure, like we had to, you know, go to collection stations and measure it like it's right to our face and sealed like a, you know, snorkel mask or something. And so that was ours, you know, when we were kids, that was our experience. That was our imprint, and that's theirs. So I'm choosing to not have my kids experience that. it's an active choice. I think I get to do it. And the key question is, do I gotta do it? Or do I get to do it? And I think I get to do it, and I want to take advantage of it. I think it's easier as an adult to convey it and actually embrace and understand. And certainly, that's like once you have kids, then remember, like my wife and I love movies. We watch movies all the time, like big movie fans. And as soon as we had kids, every time a scene comes up where, kids get hurt or kids are in danger, it's like a wildly different experience as a parent. Yeah. Wildly different experience. It's like, I'm not sure I can watch this. And even though you're not just a grown-up, you also grow up and you understand like production and actors and makeup and but still it creates this reaction. So I think I will definitely teach my kids. They have a lot of history, a lot of lineage. We have a lot of history, a lot of lineage as a family. So I'll definitely teach them. I think I'm choosing not to do it as a kid to them because I didn't get the choice when I was a kid. And I see now the untangling I need to do.
Yeah.
To get out of it. Again, I like my life very much. Right? Like there's nothing that I don't like about it. And at the same time, if I can save them some of the struggle, which this is the philosophical thing, right? Adversity builds that character, right? Struggle builds that character, right? We talk about it as entrepreneurs all the time. Should we give our kids money? Should we not give our kids money? Should they build their own business? Should we give them something? Like it's all hard decision that nobody knows the answer exactly because of those examples. You see kids that got handed everything and their life turned to shit, and kids that got handed nothing, life turned to great, and then the opposite as well. Like kids that had nothing and still have nothing, and kids that got everything still have everything. So it's not a straight line. It's not easy for that particular thing. And maybe I'm protecting myself. Maybe it's me like trying to not experience it, and not finding the best words and. Kind of like what we said with the gratitude, like me thinking through it, maybe it's going to put me back in that position. I don't want to experience it, so I'm just avoiding. But yeah, right now I'm choosing not to do it. And I think the more time passes, certainly the easier it gets. Time just does that. The fear, and this is an active conversation I think for Jewish people in general is, there's sharing the stories, like even in Passover, that's the whole thing, right? We did an entire story of, the life in Egypt and getting out of it. So they're sharing the stories, and then there's sharing the feelings. And the more you're distant from the event generationally in time, that part is harder. And that's why moments like the Poland trip, like you need that moment that helps you actually feel it and be in that situation. I think without it, it's hard to really appreciate and integrate it in a positive way, and not suddenly make the world kind of like these kids and now need to figure this out. Not think the world is against them, and every house and restaurant needs to have a safe room, and fireworks is not missiles. And
yeah. Well, I also wonder, like you've talked about many times, like what's the utility of telling them, and kind of even harking back to what we were talking about. I think there's a level of nostalgia that we all have, and maybe for you, the nostalgia of like the innocence that you wish maybe you would have had, as you have kind of been here the last 14 years. And I think that there's a level of, because I think about reflect on my own kids, like you want them to stay in that level of innocence, because in that innocence is like gratitude. It's unfettered. It's like, it's boundless, this joy and this like fascination, and keeping them in there. And I think maybe there's a level of it, at least as I'm listening to you and I'm reflecting on my own journey as a father, is that you want, like as an entrepreneur, we are always trying to get to a place of fascination and motivation, because that's like this sweet spot. So I'm really curious about that. But what I can fully appreciate you waiting, and I'm distinctly remembering, and in some ways I look back and I'm listening to your story going, well, that is real reason for fear. But I distinctly remember I was a freshman in college, first semester, freshman year, when 9/11 happened. And I remember in terms of like coming into my first floor dorm, all the doors are open. They're all turned to the exact same channel. And I came in just in time to see, I was like, what is going on? And they're like, oh, yeah, they're right as the second tower. Like, and I remember someone had called, and mind you, this is a college in Northeast Iowa. Like, you think about most insulated place, and someone phoned in like a bomb threat. And I remember calling my parents, and I was like in tears. And I'm just thinking about your journey and like the October 7th emotional, mental journey, and that the utility of telling them. Like, I remember after that point, and I was 19 years old, right? I mean, and going, there was before 9/11, and then there's distinctly after 9/11, right? And I was just drove to the airport, and it was like, anything looks suspicious, phone it in. And I'm like, before 9/11, no, you could walk with your family to the gate, and that's where you say goodbye. And there's this big line of demarcation of this like age of innocence, and so I'm just really reflecting on that. There is a level of like reality, but at the same time, as an entrepreneur, I'm trying to curate in my life a world where I blot out the noise, and I just am trying to be in a place of fascination, motivation, and creativity.
Like I like doing things, by design and not by default. And which means you need to think about the end goal, and not to be mechanistic about it, but be thoughtful about it. And right now, for their phase of their childhood, I don't see the utility. I don't see the purpose of getting them entrenched in that, because it's not a nice story, right? And a lot of these lessons are hard to understand as a kid, right? Like, even if you hear the story, get a story, you don't understand the story. And knowing when to share it with people and for what purpose is a struggle. I think a lot of veterans also in the US have the same thing, right? They come in and they come back from a war zone, and people are oblivious, right? Because that's not their lived experience. And then they have that internal struggle, and knowing when to share and for what, like share for their appeasement and kind of feeling better, which is super important. That's what the struggle they need to learn, but also sometimes share so other people appreciate. I think, like, we talk about what's happening in the country, like earlier, it's exactly that. It's that empathy of kind of saying, which is a struggle. There's always polarities, right? Kind of sharing a story so you connect with someone. That's the value of stories. And it brings me, there's another thought around, how I want to be in my kid's life. Like, what kind of character do I want to play? And I think Interstellar has this kind of line about the moment you realize you're going to be your kid's like ghost or something like that. Like, you're there to be your kid's ghost. And when I heard that line, it's, it's a big line, and I'm paraphrasing it. It's not exactly that, but something like that. But I heard that line, and I'm like, well, you can be perceived as a ghost that haunts, and you can be perceived as an ancestor. And both of them are dead and gone. And back to the anticipation or anxiety, the ghost demands something from you that generally you don't want. It's scary, right? It's not Casper. But ancestors, as a concept, it's something you aspire to, right? They have these ideal values that you want to adopt. And if they're your ancestors, it means it's in you one way or another, or you want to believe that they're in you, right? Then you can choose your ancestors. Do you choose your intellectual ancestors that, you share their ideas? Do you choose your like genetic, physical ancestors? Do you look at, Americans as your ancestors, as, human beings as your ancestors, as Minnesotans as your ancestors, right? or of course your parents. And I think, and that's something I'm trying to balance when I share kind of stories about history. I want my kids to have a sense of ancestry, and I don't want them to have a sense of ghosts. I don't want to scare them, even though it's a rough story, and have this imagery in their mind that something is haunting them, and that's scary, that they couldn't, integrate back into their lives. I want them to kind of, and then part of it is me learning how to tell the story, so something comes off as an ancestor, and not there's just like this historical character that had a bad time, or even a good time. So, but that's something I think for them, like when I think about generally sharing anything negative, but also for me, for me, and in entrepreneurs, they use the word legacy. Right, this is a very common thing in our circles. What's the legacy? Do I have a legacy? Will I have a legacy? Do I want to be, Achilles, reverberated through or an intellectual, legacy like John Locke or Adam Smith. Right? The most people don't know by name, don't understand, the magnitude, but these people created life as it is now for all of us. For me, this is a big, like day to day, trying to understand, am I doing something that would allow me to be perceived as an ancestor for someone? Like sharing the idea, sharing the story for my kids, for other people, for people listening to this podcast. Yeah, and not be a ghost. I think nobody wants to like be forgotten. I think that's an inherent like fear that a lot of people have: be abandoned, be forgotten. But they're not active about it. I think most people are reactive about that notion, and I'm trying to be more active about it. And not in the classic way of like putting a stamp, which would be great. I mean, it would be great if somehow I take this life and, it's become I either build like my biggest heroes. I mean, there's certainly like those kind of literature heroes. But my biggest heroes are definitely like the idea heroes, the Adam Smith, the Ayn Rand, people that actually like brought new concepts to human life, and then people are not aware of it. Adam Smith, two incredible books: Wealth of Nations, Invented Capitalism, which is wild to think about. Second book, though, underrated. It's called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Incredible book. And he has a line in that book, and he says, a man desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. And what he meant by that is to be worthy of love. So not only to be loved, but to be worthy of love. And I think about that line all the time. All the time. The worthy of love. And that ties into the, to the ancestor thinking, to the like, how am I coming off, for my employees, for my kids, for my business partners, for my customers? What can I do to be worthy of loved so I can be loved and not just like get it for free, if you will.
That is so beautiful. Obviously, you are very much into AI, right? And especially as in your CTO role and CTOX, right? Which is, if an audience, if you haven't checked it out and you haven't engaged, like you have to. If this conversation doesn't convince you that like Lior is going to bring a level of humanizing of the technology, it just I think you're missing out. But I'm curious, how is this viewpoint of being worthy of love so that you can love, how has that shaped your technology sort of like viewpoint? I mean, I know you and I have had some conversation, and I think that so often people in this idea of anticipation and anxiety, I feel like it vastly, like there's people pouring over to the anxiety side of this thing here. And I'm curious how this thought process of be worthy of love, to be loved, and how you view technology in as we move forward, right? Because I think that there's a level of as the Four Seasons CEO says, we systematize the predictable so we can humanize the exceptional, right? Like that's what makes me think about when I'm listening to you talk about this. Would you share a little bit about kind of how you see that and how that playing out?
Yeah, I think there's two big things I like to talk about in that space. First of all, as a general principle, I kind of say these days, automate everything but love. Automate everything but love. And the other thing, I gave a couple of dozen AI talks, including, to you and your company, right? And my favorite part of that talk is the very end, where I talk about the other AI, artificial intimacy. And that's me after talking, hyping AI for 40, 50 minutes, right? And sharing these cool examples and all the ways it can be used and should be used in fun ways. And it's not the end of work, it's the end of boring work. And, I'm a good hype man for AI. And then I get to that part, which is really my way of kind of saying, like, don't use it to make real connections artificial, make real connections fake. You should use it so the only thing that's left is genuine connections. And because if you think about it, like all the things you do in work, if you can just bottle up like if I ask you right now, what's amazing about your work, about your clients, you're not going to say the emails that you write and the reports that you give and how much they love the reports and how much they, pay on time, right? You're going to instantly reminisce. You're going to be nostalgic about these micro moments where you had a connection with your client and they had a connection with you, and maybe you gave them comfort, or you unlocked a thought, right? There was like this coin drop moment for them because of something you said. And now they feel connected. They feel safe, right? And if our day-to-day could just be that, nothing else. No emails, no reports, no invoices, no checking in, no Slack messages, just that. Like if our job was just 100% that, it would have been pretty amazing, right? For everyone, for the customers, for the providers like us. And so my perspective is that AI now allows you to do that, allows you to filter out everything else but that. And when people abuse it, then they let go of that. They let go of their opportunity to have that intimate, real connection that's bi-directional. Like you give yourself to them and they give yourself to you and they surrender to you. They're giving you attention and they're willing to hear what you have to say, right? And do to them. And I think everything else can and should be done. That's the opportunity for us right now. Let silicon do it. Let power do it, electricity do it, and let our neurons, let our protein-based neurons instead of our silicon-based neurons to actually connect with each other.
That's amazing. Lior, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Before we get to kind of the last part of our conversation, if people want to find you, they want to hear more of like the thoughts that you've had. What's the best place for them to find you?
Probably LinkedIn, Lior Weinstein. I have gray hair and a smile. Probably there. I think over the next couple of years, I'm going to start going into the other platforms, TikTok, YouTube, stuff like that. But yeah, I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear from people if I help them. The more I grow older, my sense of being more rich is as a function of the amount of love that I get to give. And I put on my LinkedIn a few years ago that my life's purpose is to, I actually have a refinement to this. So the refinement is my life purpose is to dissolve people's self-limiting beliefs so they can pursue their passions. And my first version of it was dissolve people's self-imposed barriers so they can be productive and pursue happiness. And I love productivity and I love happiness, but then I realized it's really just about pursuing a passion. So if anything I said helped you do that, I won. This is great. I won and you won. And yeah, that's the best place to connect with me for sure.
That's amazing. Any books? Any either books that either you've written, or let's give it the top three. You've given a bunch today, but what are the top three? If you're going, I want to continue this conversation with the idea men that like fuel your furnace. Who are you going to?
Haven't written one yet. I really love in the past couple of years, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, and Die with Zero. Phenomenal books. Phenomenal books. Really good perspective books. And then I go to the big ones, you know what? Because you asked for three, so I'll try to be more esoteric about it. So 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, Die with Zero, and How to Live by Derek Sivers.
Ooh,
because I'm sure most of the people haven't read that.
Yeah.
And it's an easy read, it's a thoughtful read, and everyone should read.
I love it. Lior, one of the things I love to do is give our guests the last word. What is the ripple and echo that you'd like to emanate from our conversation today?
Oh, easy. Gratitude.
Lior, thank you so much for being on. Thanks for just so generously sharing. And just the audience, I think you just got treated to a masterclass of what does kindness and intelligence look like together when they're blended perfectly. Lior, thank you so much, and loved having you on. And for sure, I'm going to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.